you made it. I know. Last night, all of our clocks sprung forward for daylight savings, and we all lost an hour of sleep. But you are the ones who are here. And that's remarkable, too, because it's not just daylight savings and you beat the clock, but it's spring in March. It's Austin in March. You guys, this is our best month, not gonna lie. To compete with this morning, you had the rodeo, you had South by Southwest, you had your kids home for spring break. Mine are all underfoot, but you're here. And it is remarkable because with this incredible weather and this glorious day, you could be out on a green belt, you could be out on the water. And I love those things, but if I'm being really honest, for like the last 6 weeks or so, I haven't really been going out and doing anything. I haven't really been making use of our city, and I haven't really been paying attention to the weather, and I haven't really even felt like myself. You know, and with good reason, because I went back to school in January, and I have a job, and I have 3 kids, all really differently aged. And you know, I have a house with constant things falling apart. And so all of those things, the maintenance of all of those things can be completely preoccupying. It can be all-consuming, and I can get so focused. And that's what I've been doing, is I've just been so focused. I've been so busy that I really just haven't felt like myself. And you know, I didn't plan it this way. It was completely unintentional, but we happen to have been, as a church, for the same length of time, covering our Easter sermon series called Good Grief. And as a church, we're about halfway through, and I didn't plan this, but what we've been talking about is trying to find the light in the darkness. Looking for that silver lining in the midst of suffering, in the midst of hardship, in the midst of life's burdens, because it can get really, really heavy. And Pastor Dave, when he kicked this sermon series off, he kicked it off with this really big question. Why do bad things happen to good people? And you know, no one's really answered that for us, but we've had some fantastic preaching up here with Pastor Ren and Pastor Travis and Pastor Dave. And what we've seen from week to week to week is that even though there is suffering, even though there is darkness, that God is in the business of redeeming and transforming. And there is goodness, and there is grace, and there is hope. And today we come to a brand new story. I'm really excited about this one. I don't know when we last did it here or if we have. We come to the story of Zacchaeus. And it's only told once, it's only told in the Gospel of Luke, and it's only 10 verses long. And so this morning we're in Luke 19, verse 1. It says, he entered Jericho and was passing through it. The he here is Jesus, and what we need to know is that he is on a journey. At this point, Luke has spent 10 chapters letting us know that Jesus knows he's going to die. In fact, Luke says it so poetically. He says Jesus turned his face, set his face to Jerusalem. What he means by that is with determination, with resolution, he is now making his way to the cross. But as he does this, he's moving through cities and towns and villages along the way. And as he's going, he's performing miracles and he's teaching them based on the topography of where he is. And as he goes, he's gathering crowds. People are falling along behind him and following him. And everywhere he goes is crowded. And so that's the journey that he's on when he enters Jericho and is passing through it. What we need to know about Jericho is that this is not your typical desert village. Jericho, perched at the edge of the Dead Sea Valley, is surrounded by hostile and infertile landscape. It's in a desert. But Jericho itself is a spring-fed oasis. It is literally an oasis in the desert. Called the City of Palms, the Eden of Palestine, the actual name Jericho means fragrant in Hebrew. It took that name from all the lush gardens and groves throughout the city. Herod had a palace there. So this place is a respite. And it would have made sense for any traveler passing through to choose this as an overnight. You are one hard push day away from Jerusalem, an uphill climb 17 miles. This makes sense anyway to stay for the night, but at this time, Passover is nearing. And so hundreds more pilgrims are flooding the city, making that trek to Jerusalem. But on top of all of this, Jericho is bustling because it is the epicenter of the balsam production and export. It is a wealthy city. And it's at a crossroads, at an intersection with multiple trade routes. And so because of this, naturally, it is a Roman regional tax center. And so this town is full of customs officials and publicans and priests and soldiers and merchants and pilgrims. This is the scene as Jesus is journeying through. But he's not the only man on a journey. Let's read verse 2. It says, "A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way." Now, we've talked about tax collectors before, but what we need to understand is Zacchaeus is not an ordinary tax collector. He's not some underling who's collecting coins from his neighbors at a toll booth. Those people work for him. He's a mob boss. He's the superintendent of customs in one of the wealthiest tax regions for Rome. He is a dignitary. He is profiting on Jericho hand over fist over its wealth. And you know, for all of that, for being rich and powerful and having clout, the crowds don't part for him. They don't seem to pay him any attention. In fact, for all of that he has going for him, he still can't see over the crowd. And so we get this almost ridiculous picture of him. I don't know about you, but I can picture him sort of hiking his robes to go running out ahead, dust billowing behind him, finding the nearest tree and clambering up it like a child. It's a ridiculous sight. He's risking his reputation and his respect to do this thing. A dignitary in the most undignified act. Nothing you'd see an adult do, much less some sort of official. But he's trying to see Jesus. In verse 5, it says this: "When Jesus came to the place, He looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, "He has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." There's a lot about this story that we don't know. And one of the things that we don't know is whether or not Zacchaeus was a good person. Now, I know the crowd called him a sinner, but we don't actually know if they're right. Because you see, when Zacchaeus says, "I will give half my possessions to the poor and I will repay," in the original Greek, those verbs are ambiguous and they can mean one of 2 things. They can mean, customarily, I have given half. Customarily, I have repaid, which would make him really misunderstood, where all of his townsmen judged a book by its cover. Or it could mean how we tend to read it in our English Bibles, which is, from now on, I'm going to change my ways. From now on, I'm going to give to the poor. In which case, he's a repentant sinner. But we don't really know. And we also don't know, when Jesus calls him a son of Abraham, what exactly he meant by that. Because it could mean that Zacchaeus is of Jewish descent. By birthright, he's a son of Abraham. It could mean that the actions he's demonstrating, the generosity he's demonstrating, is in keeping with God's laws. Or it could mean that he is one of the first of the Gentile converts, that this is Jesus declaring that he's grafting in somebody who otherwise wouldn't belong. We don't know. But what we do know is, unlike the woman at the well, and unlike the woman caught in adultery, and unlike the rich young ruler, and unlike the blind beggar, this man gets a name. It's unusual, and he gets a name, and not only does Luke name it, but Jesus names it. And that name means innocent. And what we know is that Jesus looks up in that tree and he says, "Zacchaeus." And that moment was personal. God didn't just see him, God knew him, and God loved him. And you know, if we think it's undignified for a dignitary to climb a tree, it was that much more so undignified for Jesus to stop there and talk to him. Because in the culture of that day, if you were deemed a sinner, you deserved to be ostracized. It was a deterrence. And anyone who engaged that person, who shared a meal with that person, was sharing in their sin, was partaking of that ill-gotten gain, was a partner in crime. And so Jesus shouldn't have engaged him at all. But he does. And we know that it's not just making eye contact. And it's not just saying a nice thing in passing. He goes to stay. That word there that says to be the guest of in verse 7, that word there is kataluo, and it actually means to unloose or to break down, because that word comes from what you would do when you would unhitch your animals for the night. This implies duration. This is not just, I'm going to come have coffee with you. This is, I'm going to put the animals up. I'm going to loosen the garments, and I'm going to put my feet up, and we're going to rest a while. We're going to have relationship. I'm in no hurry when I'm with you. I'm settling in. It's a big word. And these two men were both, each of them on quests. Because you see the verb in verse 3 that says Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was. Zateo, it actually is trying to seek, seeking for. It's the same one in verse 10 when it says the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Same words. See, Zacchaeus is trying to see Jesus, and Jesus is trying to find Zacchaeus. He's exactly who he came for. They're looking for each other. You know, it was like maybe a week ago Friday that things were off enough that I sat down with my husband Derek to say, what is going on with me? I don't feel like myself. And he's gracious and kind to me. And as we were sitting there trying to process it, I had a revelation. Somehow along this way, these last month or so, I've forgotten how to play. I stopped playing. You know, and it makes sense. We're all adulting. But somewhere I became the taskmaster of my home. I was so focused on whether or not your room was clean and your homework was done and all the things were done. So many checklists that I completely forgot to play. And it kind of went off like a light bulb. And so that afternoon, when I went to go pick up my son Mitchell, this was in my head. And he hops in the car, he's 7, and he says, Mom, let's drive to Ellie's school with the windows down. And I heard it before it came out my mouth. No, you'll let the cold air out. I heard it, and I caught it. And I was like, sure, buddy. So uncomfortable for me. But I rolled our windows down, and we drove the whole way to Ellie's school with our hands dancing in the wind. All the cold air just out the window. So it's okay because it's spring in Austin. You know, we don't know. There's a lot we don't know. We don't know the significance of the sycamore tree. And man, did I want to tell you one. Because he names the kind of tree. And anyone who tells you that they know is just making an educated guess, because Luke does not tell us. But I've got some options for you. It might have been symbolic of Zacchaeus' sin. But see, one of the things that I found that is fascinating to me and completely unexpected is that the word for sycamore in this verse, it's a hypoxlegomenon, which means fancy way of saying it only appears here in the New Testament. And it shares a root word with defraud from verse 8. I know, if you're as curious about this as I am, I'll tell you. I know you aren't, but I'm going to tell you anyway, because it's fascinating. So here's the thing. Apparently, to be someone who defrauds in the ancient Greek was literally translated fig informer. And historians don't actually know exactly why, but it's believed that because the fig was this cash crop for ancient Greece, it was heavily regulated. And so the government was cracking down on whether or not you'd pay taxes on your figs before you took them to market and whether or not you were illegally exporting them. And so there were these fig informers who would tattletale on you. But it makes sense. If you're the fig informer, then you're really susceptible to being bribed, and you get associated with extortion and false accusation. And so over time, fig informer became defrauder. It's the same word where we get sycophant. And so maybe Luke puts Zacchaeus up the tree of his own wrongdoing. Maybe he really is a sinner, and he is a fraud, and he is a thief, and that's what the tree represents. But maybe it's symbolic of his sin. Because see, another interesting thing about this sycamore fig tree is that its fruit is completely useless. It's prolific. It makes about 6 crops a year, so it almost always has fruit in its trees, but those fruit you don't want to eat because when they're unripe, they're completely bitter. And when they're ripe, they get infected with insects. And so the only way to have the fruit have any meaning, any value, to make it edible, you have to slash it. The fruit has to be pierced or wounded. And so maybe for Luke, maybe he was really poetic, and this tree was a metaphor for Zacchaeus. A short, squatty trunk, big, broad arms full of useless fruit that would have to be wounded to be of any value. And maybe the suffering he encountered at being ostracized and the crowds not parting for him and being labeled correctly or incorrectly was just the kind of suffering he needed to be ripe for Jesus. Maybe the tree just stands for childlike boldness and curiosity, going out on a limb for Jesus. Maybe it was just a tall tree for a short man. That's also a possibility. We don't know. But whatever it was, God met him there, clinging to his branch. At the very place he looked for Jesus, Jesus looked for him. And in talking about the sermon this week, Pastor Wren said something that I absolutely loved, and I don't feel comfortable plagiarizing it from him, so I'm going to give him full credit. He said this, quote, "Zacchaeus had to do something nobody else did to get what nobody else got." Him putting himself out there like that, acting like a child, it put him in a position to have Christ in his home. My son and I, we play this game called Rainbow Car Game. And we've made it up, so you won't know what it is. But when we drive in our car, we try to spot a red car. And when we've got a red car, we spot an orange, and then a yellow, and then a green, and then a blue. And if you drive a purple car, you are our hero. Because it's really hard to find a purple car, and when we pass one, we all squeal and dance and sing, and it's ridiculous. Does anyone have a purple car? Okay, if you do, please email me, because I would like to arrange a visit with my son. But this week, because I apparently am not playing anymore, and I'm really trying to lean into that, I went on a walk this week, and I played the rainbow game with God. I was on my walk, and I was like, how could I play? And I thought, I will find something that's red in nature. And I found red berries. And I kind of smirked, because God's amazing. And then this butterfly with an orange band on its wing went by. And then there was a yellow wildflower and green grass and blue sky. Those were easy. But then I was nearing home, and I was like, what's purple in this alleyway, God? What do you have that's purple for me here? And I took 2 steps forward, and tucked behind a light post was one wild weed full of purple flowers. Oh, I think he's playful. And so I was so excited, I got my kids, and I was like, we're going to go on this walk, and we're going to look for things that are colors. And I took them, and we did it together. But as we rounded the lap, Ellie, my 11-year-old, said, Mom, let's do it again, but this time we'll just look for leaves that are red, orange. And I was like, you know, one of those moments as a mom where you're like, I want you to build faith, and this might not help. We're like, okay, God. So we went around, and I was like, whoa, this is a tall order. Y'all, we did it. It's a little, but I mean, I have a photo. A red, I know. And even if you think that's all in my head, I played. And I feel like God played back. You know, yes, the big questions are worth wrestling with. Yes, the work is worthy, the adulting and the hard stuff that we have to do, that we need to do. That is worthy work. But if you're anything like me, you can get so focused on the end goal that you completely lose sight of the journey. You completely forget what road you're on and why to start with. See, Jesus was on a journey to the cross. He was on his way to do the greatest human feat that has ever been accomplished for the sake of the world. It was heavy, heavy stuff. And yet he did not let that mission keep him from stopping to see, to stay with Zacchaeus. Because you see, what Jesus knows that we forget over and over and over again is that that was the point. Zacchaeus was the point. That was what the cross was for. The cross was so that we could live the goodness of God in the land of the living, abundant life. So that we could play and share a meal and unhitch our animals and let it go for a minute and rest in the knowledge that he's got it, that he did it, that he paid it. That's the point. So that we can enjoy the sweetness even as we adult. You know, there's a lot. We talked a lot about what we don't know about this story, but there are two things we do know. We know that we serve a God who stops for us. And he rewards those who seek him. And sometimes that doesn't have to be grueling or difficult or dogmatic. We don't have to take the hardest road. Sometimes the simple thing is the most transformative. Sometimes it's as simple as running up ahead. Letting the obstacles not get in your way, but running up ahead to catch a glimpse for him, a glimpse of him. Maybe it's as simple as climbing a tree. Would you pray with me? Father, may everyone in this room, at least one time this week or today, engage in play. Yes, the heaviness is there, the hardness, the grief, the work. Yes, and it will all be there tomorrow, Lord, but may we remember that you paid the price. The work is finished, and we are here to live abundantly. We're here for joy, we're here for peace, we're here for fellowship, we're even here for play. And we can trust you with the way the story ends, and we can trust you with all the questions we can't answer and all the things that we don't know. Because you are God, and you stop for us, and you delight in us. May we delight in you. I pray that over everyone here and their families. In Jesus' name, amen.